Some people are of the opinion that we might be on this cusp of another recession. Maybe, maybe not, right? No one has a crystal ball, but there's also, just generally speaking, I think a lot of anxiety these days about AI displacing jobs. And, it's pretty amazing what AI is able to do nowadays. I use it almost every single day. But having been through multiple economic downturns, like the dot-com one, 2008, and then, just having seen so many different cycles, do you have any advice for kind of how to handle uncertainty, I guess? Because I feel like a lot of students, especially ones that are graduating right now, they feel just very uneasy about, what they should do with their career, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I look back, times of stress, uncertainty, like when you're graduating and you're going through interviews, I'll tell this story where I went to final rounds for McKinsey coming out of Berkeley. And it was down to me and this other classmate to final rounds. And we had this super Saturday where, like 8 case interviews. And I remember bombing one of them. And unfortunately, the one I bombed, she was responsible for university recruiting. So, needless to say, I did not get the offer. My friend or my classmate did. When that happened, I felt like my life was over. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed. There's that experience, and then there's times where you get excited because you have an interview set up. You go and you thought you did really well, but you didn't get the offer. I think everybody's career you'll face that. You'll face that, and I was not cool with all that. I was worried. I was stressed. I think there was so much expectations that I put on myself that when disappointment hit and you run into an obstacle, it's natural to be depressed about it, but if I were to look back and, think about those failures, I think those things you could use that as like motivation to say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna get the next one. And it can be tough. You have to kind of give yourself a pep talk to don't give up. I think especially in tough job market, you might feel like, I'm reaching out to my contacts. I'm sending out resumes. I'm asking people to, talk to their, hiring managers. You're doing all the necessary things. And I would say, I think continuous effort will ultimately get the results you want. And I think you only fail if you decide that, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, or you give up. I think if I were to give some advice during times of uncertainty, just keep pushing, keep pushing.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people this is like, yeah, whatever is happening in the economy, if we go into a recession, all that stuff, like, unless you're Jerome Powell or you're someone who actually has some control over what's going to happen, which you don't, then it's pointless for you to spend any of your mental bandwidth worrying about that stuff. You got to put blinders on and just focus on the things that you actually can control, right?
Yep.
You can control your effort. You can control how hard you prep for your interviews. You can control how much you network with people. You can control, there are certain things where you can actually affect the outcome. And then there are certain things where you can't affect the outcome and you just shouldn't think about it at all, as hard as that may be. But that's literally like just a waste of your time. Right. And so, like, even when I graduated in '08, it was the same thing. It was a really shitty market. But, like, I mean, what am I going to do about it? Like,
Look, I guess these days you could take a year off. But I always feel like, that's somewhat of it's a luxury. If you have the luxury to do that, then, go enjoy. If you're interested in, then, starting your career, you gotta push and do all the things that you mentioned, right?
yeah, and also, is it unlucky if you have to graduate during a more recessionary environment? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I graduated in '08, I was like, my friends that were like one or two classes above me, that was like the market was booming. It was like ton of LBOs, everyone's great, getting great experience. I was like, why do I have to graduate in '08? But then at the same time, if you think about it, like, there are people that graduated in '08 that did really, really well in their careers, and there are people that graduated in '08 that didn't do very well. But it's like, no matter when you graduate, there are people that are going to do well. There are people that are not going to do well. You kind of get to decide, like, who you want to be, right? Or which group you want to be in. And so I think it's just like really taking ownership of, again, the things that you can control and not worrying about everything else. that goes a long way, right? And then the other thing that I always tell people is like, I mean, this is not something that I came up with, but I forgot where I heard this, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really good. Which is everything you want is on the other side of hard or whatever. Like basically, just like because other by definition, it's not. It's probably something you already have, where it's just a status quo, which
Yep.
means you probably don't care for it because you already have it. But like what are usually if there's something really good, which is why you want it, a lot of other people probably want it too. And it's gonna be really competitive. And that's why you have to usually have to be willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do to get there. Anyway, I just feel like I see a lot of people give up way too easily because they want the thing that's really good, but they're not willing to do what's necessary to get that type of outcome.